Carter from Carter Curricula, where I am on a mission to savor our shared humanity by close reading poetry, especially poems written by dead American poets. We're in a poem called Aunt Sue's Stories, written by Langston Hughes. We are in a series of poems written by Langston Hughes, of all of his poetry between the 1921 and 1930. That's what my goal is to get through all of those. The poem that we're taking a look at, Aunt Sue's Stories, before we get into the reading of the poetry, before we get into the close reading of the poetry, I want to ask you this question right here. What does every family need? Right. What does every single family, regardless of which family you're in, what do they need? What is one of the cornerstones that they need in that family? Now, before you answer that question so quickly, let me see if I can guess what kind of answers that I will get from you as you think through this idea. What does every family need? I think that many of you will say every family needs love. Every family needs a family needs love. A family needs people to go to where they can be unconditionally loved. Maybe another person might say every family needs a commitment to the family. They all need to understand that blood is thicker than water, and they need to know that anyone on the outside is not family because they're not blood, and everyone with the same blood is family. And that's who they should commit themselves to. Well, let's take a look in this poem written by Langston Hughes and see what he seems to suggest that every family member, every family needs. Um, let's read the poem, and then we will give a close reading of it, and then hopefully we will apply it into our everyday lives so that we might be able to savor our shared humanity. Here we go. Aunt Sue's Stories. Aunt Sue has a head full of stories. Aunt Sue has a whole heart full of stories. Summer nights on the porch, Aunt Sue cuddles a brown-faced child to her bosom, tells him stories. Black slaves working in the hot sun, and black slaves walking in the dewy night, and black slaves singing sorrow songs on the banks of a mighty river, mingle themselves softly in the flow of Aunt Sue's voice, mingle themselves softly in the dark shadows that cross and recross Aunt Sue's stories. And dark-faced child listening knows that Aunt Sue's stories are real stories. He knows that Aunt Sue never got her stories out of any book at all, that they came right out of her own life. The dark-faced child is quiet of a summer night, listening to Aunt Sue's stories. Whee! Aunt Sue's got some stories to tell. Aunt Sue has lines one and two. Aunt Sue has stories that are a head full of stories and a heart full of stories. Aunt Sue is dripping with stories. Aunt Sue is dripping with stories. Her life is filled with stories, head and heart full of those stories. Well, sometimes her nieces and nephews come over. In this instance, her nephew is in her lap. She's cuddling this brown-faced, I would assume it's a nephew, a brown-faced child or someone who's very close to her that that person calls aunt, and tells him stories. Summer nights hit. They're on that front porch just chilling, family time. Aunt Sue cuddles the brown-faced child, the child she is hanging out with, and she's telling this child about the stories of black slaves, stories of our ancestors, stories in this particular stanza, which is the longest stanza, these are the stories that she shares. Hot sun, dewy night, sorrow songs that actually do what? This is sorrow songs that mingle themselves softly in the flow of Aunt Sue's story. So these sorrow songs, she's speaking and she's got sorrow songs mingled in her voice as she shares these stories. Mingle themselves. Once again, it is the singing sorrow songs that mingle themselves softly in the dark shadows that cross and recross. So she doesn't just tell these stories once. She recrosses these stories. These stories happen more than just once. She tells them over and over again to this kid. She's not just going to tell the kid the story one time and be done with it. She's going to make sure that these stories are embedded into them just like they are in her. And the dark face child did something that was really critical. Listen. I remember being a young kid and hearing stories from my family, and I would be very impatient. Man, to get the story told. I'd be like, you know, you told this story five, six, 700 times. You know, these stories that I would hear from some of the older people in my family. Man, I when I was younger, I did not want to listen to those stories. This child does. This child does the wise thing, which is listen to Aunt Sue's real stories. Not no stories from a book, real stories that he knows that Aunt Sue never got her stories. Aunt Sue never got these stories out of any book. They came right from her own life. And even some of these stories might be stories that were passed down to her, but the fact is that Aunt Sue got these stories, and the Aunt Sue, just like it says at the very beginning, head full of stories, heart full of stories. She's dripping with, she's oozing with these stories. She's got story to tell, right? And the dark face is quiet in a similar posture of listening. I should have it right up here. In a similar posture of listening right up here. Um, this dark faced child is very wise. Of a summer night, talking about summer again, listening once again. That's the second time listening pops up. Listening, second time summer pops up. To Aunt Sue's stories. These are the stories that Aunt Sue would tell. Now back to the question that I had earlier. What does every family member need? Every family member needs an Aunt Sue. Every family member needs someone who is going to share stories, stories about family, the stories about the culture. Every single family needs a historian. Every single family needs an Aunt Sue. Man, thankfully, thankfully, in my family, I've had plenty of Aunt Sues. One Aunt Sue in particular gave me such lesson in caring about stories. This person would email me often and hang on to this banner of being essentially family historian, a person who would care enough to investigate the history of our family and share those things with other people so that it could give us a context of who we are, context of what we are all about. Now, you see that in this poem, there's a section that says Banks talks about mighty river. I think this is an allusion to the Negro Speaks of Rivers, and in the Negro Speaks of Rivers is talking about this individual who is connecting himself up with the 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 earth, the rivers, the rivers that ran deep. So this person wasn't going to disconnect, but connect themselves up with that depth, because in so doing, he would receive depth. And in sharing the family stories, there's depth that happens because you are receiving depth. I receive depth. I get a context of who I am when I hear these stories. Imagine being an individual who's like 10 years old and you don't have any family around, no parents, no brothers, no sisters around. All you have is like yourself and maybe other people who don't know your own history. So you don't know your own history. You don't know the stories of who you were as a baby, no stories to tell about how you ran off in the department store, no stories to tell about how you ate um, peas for the first time and spit them out, no stories to tell. Can you imagine? Can you imagine the disconnect that would be there if there were no stories that you had? Where Aunt Sue is a storyteller. Aunt Sue is making sure that the young people have a context of who they are. understands that they are in the river of life. They are in the flow, and that river is flowing mightily. Wow! Oh, wow. Aunt Sue's stories. Head full of stories, heart full of stories, sitting there on that summer night, sharing stories with the young folks. I hope you have someone like Aunt Sue in your family. Well, that's all I have for this one. I will see you on the next one where I think I'll be in a Robert Frost poem. I'll definitely come back with a Langston Hughes, but I'm going Robert Frost, Langston Hughes, Robert Frost, Langston Hughes. At least that's the effort. So I'll see you on the next one.